Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, VFX in 2021. We hope to make you aware of what works, who's works, and who's working, and what's changing. Just a quick introduction, which isn't working. Quick introduction. So my name is John Peddie from John Peddie Research. We are industry advisors. We've been around since the late 80s. A lot of folks probably already know us. We do marketing, consulting work, and testing work. And we advise companies and conferences literally all over the world. The visual effects industry is in a terrific transition. And whereas we used to have a linear pipeline of getting things done, which was awkward and terrible if you ever had to change, we now have everybody talks to everybody and can deal with every application almost simultaneously. And the net result is that work gets done faster, it gets done better, it gets done globally, and it gets done democratically. And this is a work in process. We're still building these systems to do it. But every one that gets added to the process shows us that it's the right way to go, and that it seems to be actually getting a little bit easier, believe it or not. So we've assembled a team of experts to talk about this, and our moderator, Kathleen Maher, will be asking them a few questions about their experiences in committing to this brave new world of everybody being able to talk to everybody with every application all the time. So on that happy note, I turn it over to Kathleen Maher.
Hi, thanks for being here, everybody. We wanted to talk about the big changes that have happened since 2021 in a more positive light, looking forward, or 2020, look forward to 2021, because I think we're all suitably tired of what we have now. My questions disappeared, so suddenly I'm on my own. But anyway, the structure of the talk is what's working, who's working, and what changes forever. And so I thought we'd start out talking about the changes we've seen. So let's kick it off with Angus, because Angus took it on himself to start a brand new business right when the pandemic hit. So I think you know a lot about what changes.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, who would have known that the year that I start a new business, the pandemic would happen? So literally kind of beginning of this year, started a new company, Preymaker. We wanted to do things a different way. Luckily, we had kind of really had quite a bit of experience in the industry, and we were looking at ways of kind of changing the way we work, how to be more collaborative, more creative, how to use the latest technology. And, we were able to really embrace some of the technologies that have allowed this business to continue during the pandemic pretty quickly. Embracing new technologies like the cloud and that have allowed us to work in multiple different ways.
I'm sorry, I am definitely having technical difficulties all of a sudden. I'm on a Mac. And if I just hold my finger down on this key, it stops. So one of the things that working with John Peddie Research, as I've been tracking the entertainment industry and also design and engineering, we've seen sort of similar trends in that they're all these, the pandemic has accelerated everything that's already been happening. So for instance, entertainment was heading gradually to the cloud, and now we see it happening much more rapidly. In the same way, we've seen the use of LED screens, VR, etc. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what are some of these obvious changes we're seeing, like how do you see life changing on set? And James, you want to start with that?
Sure. It's kind of been interesting this year because I guess we all expected the lockdowns to be much shorter than they actually have become. And there's definitely been a evolution, I think, in the way that people are regarding going onto set and how we sort of approach that. Certainly at first, obviously, we weren't shooting anything. Everything stopped. And then there was sort of a tentative movement towards perhaps doing more things in post-production and fixing things that way. And then we evolved to actually being on set. And obviously the initial approach to that is really just taking the traditional way of being on set, except we were all wearing masks and visors and getting COVID swabs and having our temperature checked and all the very uncomfortable things that go with that. Limiting the number of people that were actually on set, etc. It was interesting byproduct that it actually did show how few people you could have on set to produce something. So in terms of advertising, that meant that a lot of the clients stayed away. I'm not going to want to say that was a blessing, but it was pretty good.
James, you mentioned too that as a result, they've gotten more comfortable with just accepting what's going on, right?
I think there's just been a forced trust that people have had to buy into, and that goes beyond what's on set. It's also for a lot of us visual effects practitioners who are in lockdown, we're working from home. And previously, I think there was an expectation that everybody had to stay in the office and be together. And our offices were getting bigger and bigger, and everyone was searching for real estate. Certainly in the case of Framestore, we were wondering how we were going to deal with the fact that we needed more people. The lockdown happened, and obviously the need for the office became almost zero, and everyone was working from home, and it wasn't disastrous. And I think that was the most amazing epiphanal thing, that it could actually work, that you could have a dispersed group of people working together and producing stuff at the same rate, if not perhaps even a little bit faster than they did when they were together, in one place.
Well, you know what else I was wondering, and from all of you, are there areas where you've seen more experimentation and a sense of play happening? Maybe because people are able to work at home, but I was also thinking in your case, James, that clients are maybe a little more relaxed after they see that nothing terrible is going to happen. And I would think, Erik, in the case of Weta as well, as maybe security doesn't seem to, has been okay so far.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that this morning, and it's really it gives me a lot of hope that maybe there's a way, beyond the pandemic, where this just continues to be a thing that's possible. I think for a number of years there were obviously very large security concerns around a lot of the content that we work on for clients, but it's been really great that in the last 9 months, since everybody was sort of forced to go through this exercise of working from home, that all of those security protocols that have been put in place have done their job, and we've kept all of that content secure, and people keep cranking through things wherever they happen to be, and that's great. And I hope that we get to a point where if somebody is in a position where they're finding that they are actually way more productive and they have a better work-life balance, and they're able to see their kids and all that kind of thing, and still be getting through the work that they need to do without the hour commute or with all those kind of things that have been part of our lives up until this year, that is allowed to continue. That whatever is the most productive for individuals is what they can continue to do. I mean, I think what we've seen certainly is that there are plenty of meetings that you attend during the day that you don't physically need to be present for. And in fact, half the time, maybe you're not even a main participant in that meeting, but just the ability to sort of listen in on something, just stay up to date on where tech is inside the company, or give your opinion every now and then, without needing to physically, sit in that office or sit in that conference room, let's say, for an hour of your day, is, you can still be getting things done at your desk. It's really fantastic.
I think that ties into a lot with how we see sort of traditional roles collapsing into one another, silos breaking down, and Matt and Angus, I think sometimes the innovation side maybe is like for you, Matt, isn't Foundry being called on to make some of this stuff work and work differently? Like we have the LEDs on set. How hard is it to change them when you need to? Where does the lighting on set and in the in the game engine, or how do you bring all those together?
Yeah, I mean, this is an area we're really curious about, and we've been curious for a long time. We've always at Foundry kind of been launching experiments over time, playing with new technology. But I think what's been different in 2020 is how that's connecting with the way people have been forced one way or another to kind of organize themselves around using this technology. For example, Angus mentioned, cloud. Cloud's been available for a long, long time, but the pandemic in some ways been a forcing function for people to contemplate, like, what could it really mean in terms of how you adopt it, and then how do you actually deploy that to people and make them productive? I think with LED screens and real time, it's similar. I've talked to so many people this year who have been experimenting with game engine and figuring out how to weave that into the overall process. And now, we're at a stage where you can weave it into, for example, shooting on a virtual production stage, but then how do you carry that, forward through the other connected processes? How do you, get audio and, post-production and, everything else that goes around it. I think that's what's really been special about 2020 is it's kind of been an accelerator for a lot of things where the industry's been experimenting, kind of sitting on the fence, and now they're sort of weaponized commercially. I think what we're going to see in 2021 is people actually taking advantage of those things and using them in production. And that's kind of where our R&D team has gone from, these are sort of science experiments that we're just throwing out in the world, to figuring out how do we get these into product streams? How do we get people actually using them? And we're even going back into the archives and like finding projects that we did in the past, either through in collaboration with other researchers or universities, and we're saying like, hey, these actually have commercial applications now. It's really interesting. It's an interesting time. It's an inflection point.
Yeah, I was gonna say all that fooling around that you were doing actually pays off down the road finally. When Angus, I think you've made invention part of your motto almost as Preymaker, and your earlier work with the mill with the Blackbird. Are you finding this a really good time to start inventing stuff?
Absolutely. I think that's just kind of inventing and playing around and kind of using different technologies, not what they've been designed for, is sometimes, you get amazing results out of it. I started using game engines 5 years ago because you could see that there was something there. There was something kind of special, and you could tell that, as the quality got better, that you could actually use it for more than just video games. And what we're seeing now with large scale production, you can do a huge amount with real time, but it doesn't necessarily just replace a part of the business. It actually changes the way you work. So, and I think, iterating and kind of getting into a real time world and setting up a scene and moving the camera around while it's lit, moving assets, and it's more like being on set. It's very interesting. It's the whole kind of CGI and visual effects pipeline used to be very linear. It used to be kind of very, very kind of one by one by one. Once you pass this stage, then you go to the next stage, then you go to the next stage. What's great about real time is you kind of throw it all together, and you kind of can see things. You can make decisions early on that you might kind of not have seen or not have made. So I think ultimately it's a very creative tool that we've now suddenly started using in earnest. And I think it's really going to improve the quality of what we do. And I think it's also going to educate the artists more in terms of the art of filmmaking, not necessarily just the kind of modeling or texturing or that specific silo that they've been in, but people then step back and they see things from a more holistic view, a more holistic approach. And I think that's really exciting.
I think that's a marvelous point. And I think also it gets to something we were talking about when we'd been talking together earlier about the differences in the way people have reacted to working remotely if they have to, or just changes in the less people on set and that sort of thing. And I worry sometimes that it's hard to train people. And Angus, you said a great thing about one of the important things about teams is they develop a culture, and it's harder to develop a culture in Zoom. So I'm wondering, looking forward, are people who are uncomfortable on screen disadvantaged, and how can they sort of, what skills is it really important to foster to be relevant?
Company. Sorry, Kathleen, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I just said relevant.
One of the things that I think is most valuable in a company is culture. It is over and above the work that you create. It's the people that you work with, the kind of environment that you work in, the camaraderie. And that's something that's very difficult to recreate over Zoom and remotely. So I can definitely feel a difference. We're working well and we're able to kind of execute things, but there's definitely some magic that's lost. And also, just as you said, some training. There's nothing like actually having somebody with you kind of following exactly what you're doing or working alongside you or working in the same room. So even though I think we're getting by, I think it's different. I think, there's positives and negatives. I think the negatives right now is that you don't have the ability to mentor and grow people very quickly. But the positives is people don't have to do this crazy commute, as James talked about. This kind of this thing when you have to live in generally a big city, and you have to kind of have this hour-long commute either way, and that's a lot of time that people spend. So having the opportunity to work from home, I think, has been a positive. But I feel like having a physical space and having a call is still very important for creativity, for culture, and just to look someone in the eye. Like, I was on a shoot recently, and it was so refreshing to finally be back on set with the director and with the DP and talking about a shot and and it was more creative. And I think that's what I really loved. But I think a lot of what we're using right now is definitely going to stick. I think there's all this Zoom kind of world that we're living in, and all this remote workflow is definitely going to stick, but it's going to be a blend.
Erik, you were talking a little bit about that as well. And one of the things that was fun, I thought, is that Weta is spread out in several buildings. So you guys you had commutes as well, even within a.
Yeah. I mean, it's a kind of a funny thing. I mean, we are, I think, possibly the only very large single site facility that's kind of left. We haven't sort of opened up satellite offices elsewhere in the world, and so to some degree, we haven't been, we didn't have our hand forced to need to come up with necessarily a lot of these kind of technologies to allow us to communicate with, another office in a different country, the way that some other facilities have. And so to some degree, up until the pandemic sort of forced our hand to do this, we were still, people were going back and forth between buildings, because we went from, back during Lord of the Rings days, maybe from a single building to 2 buildings to 3 to 5. And I think we're like 14 or 15 buildings now, but not in a campus. And so we're sort of spread across the sort of suburb that Weta is located in, and that sort of required people to physically travel for meetings. But now that we've all had to get into this sort of remote working thing, a lot of that stuff just stops, and everybody can now attend from wherever they happen to be, which is huge. And I would sort of certainly echo what Angus was just saying in terms of the face-to-face is absolutely enormous. I mean, given our geographical location on the planet, obviously, so much of what we are doing is with clients is via video conferencing for reviews and everything else. And it's always astonishing when you're in, say, LA for the week, just to sort of face-to-face with a director, how much you can get through in the course of a day or two that might take you weeks, to really kind of hammer out some of those issues. And so to some degree, it's like, yes, the remote working stuff is obviously a massive boon to what we're doing, but is never going to replace face-to-face. I think there's just so much that you can gain from being physically in the same place as the creatives that you're working with.
So, one of the things I was wondering about is what kinds of new technologies are we leveraging? We've been talking about virtual production for a long time, but again, that's something else that's gotten accelerated, and it's no longer sort of a magical new thing. It's a matter of fact. James, you were talking about a lot more use of, say, AI and machine learning to make work easier. And I thought that was fascinating, but I wasn't quite sure how it comes into play.
It is fascinating. It's something I think which is developing. So, it's not something that necessarily you'll come across in, well, I guess you do, but, generally a lot of it tends to be somewhat theoretical or white papers or whatnot. And we're only now just seeing it start to sort of come out and start to be integrated into certain parts of software. There's definitely things that are coming about which are going to change the way that we work, and it's going to change our pipelines drastically. And whether that's just very procedural things like auto rotoscoping, basically, or using rotobots, towards stuff where you get a automatic population of a 3D scene with appropriate elements. It holds huge amounts of promise, and obviously is the future. I mean, I don't think anyone doubts that this is the way the industry is going to go. The immediate practicality of that fitting into sort of current pipelines and things like that is a little more unclear as to, how you can integrate it in. And until it becomes something which is common, I think, in your off-the-shelf software, it's not necessarily something which is going to immediately give you that acceleration. There's also, I think, some outreach that needs to be done so that not only our industry understands this stuff, but our clients also understand that. And it's not quite related the same way, but a conversation I had just the other day with a friend of mine who's working on a show in visual effects, and he was called by basically the head of studio, and they said, "We want to do this show like The Mandalorian." And he was like, "Well, okay, so we'll do it as LED screens in the background." "Yeah, that's the way we want to do it." It's like, okay, so, you understand that we actually need to get approval on all those backgrounds prior to the shoot, and they're going to have to be built and all the rest of it. And the answer was, "Well, what do you mean? We can't do that. That's not possible." So again, great technology. And if you have the right group and the right project, it works exceptionally well. But you need, I guess, an understanding of what the limitations of that or the workflow of that is with the clients as well to help them buy into that. And so, AI or machine learning stuff in many ways, not in sort of every instance, but particularly when it's applied to finished imagery, also needs an amount of preparation and an amount of a kind of approach which will help it be successful, which is outside, I think, of the language that people are used to processing when talking about production.
Well, and that was something else that we started out talking about too, how the linear pipeline collapses and becomes more spherical in a way with people hopping in and out. And but people have sort of traditional brains. And so Erik, you were talking about this, about like, well, yeah, you can do previs and make it the real viz, but then are you sure that everybody's going to sign off and say we're done? And
I think there's just going to have to be this period of understanding and acceptance from the filmmakers and the studios that you need to, if you want to go this route, it just means you're taking a time investment up front. You're taking your post schedule and you're putting it into your prep schedule, so that obviously if you do need to make fixes down the track, it's always a possibility, but you don't want to pay to do the work twice. And so I think as soon as filmmakers, I mean, the promise of this is that everybody sees literally what's going to be there. And so you can make those creative decisions about, well, oh, actually, if we came over here and put the camera this way, we could shoot it into that light source and it's going to do this beautiful stuff. You can make those on the spot decisions the same way you would if it was a live action location shoot, which is fantastic. But it does mean, that you need to at least, settle on and agree that this is what the building is going to look like. And this is what our character in the background, this is what their animation style is going to be, and all those kind of things. Otherwise, you're just wasting time and redoing your work. To the point of, I guess, machine learning and applications for that, I think we're finding here, It's certainly something that we're investing a lot of kind of interest and kind of research into. Is there's applications to use that all over the pipeline in ways of speeding things up, in the sense of something as mundane as we've got days, if not months, of historic motion capture data, for example. Like, we can use machine learning to say, I'm looking for just the right 2 seconds of performance from years worth of mocap data. Go. I'm looking for 2 seconds of something, find it. And like, that's one fantastic application of something that you wouldn't necessarily associate. I think we think deep machine learning these days, and we think of deep fakes and that kind of image manipulation things, but there's applications to use this in our pipelines all over the place.
Matt, too, that brings up the issue of pipelines that we've been thinking about. And one of the things, I've been listening to a lot of other talks on this same subject, and one of the things that came up was, as we started changing our pipeline, we had to think about what our pipeline was. And exactly in the case you were talking about, Erik, about where is all that stuff? How do we find it faster? Or and Angus, how do we do the things we always do, but using software and AI to do it faster? So Matt, are you seeing the same thing? Are you working with studios and helping them redefine their pipelines? Like,
Yeah,
you can't do it all with a game engine. You have to do it this way, add this part.
Yeah, we had a project earlier this year called Sauce, where we worked with Double Negative, was integrating search functionality for their asset database, which was very similar to what Erik was mentioning about that use case of, like, I've got all this stuff, how do I collect it all up? But really, a lot of that's being driven by the need to have assets prepped much earlier. Much earlier in the pipeline, so that when you get everybody, together, it's not a green screen where you can just sort of defer all those things to post and say, yeah, we'll figure out, what that landscape looks like in post, and, make all those decisions there. So those tools to help people bring everything together, that's one aspect of machine learning that's really helpful. And I think, just the ability to kind of, like you said, the end of the pipeline is now kind of the start of the pipeline. So it's kind of gone full circle. So part of it's that, and part of it too with machine learning and these types of technologies is, like, they're really great on paper. There's great white papers written about machine learning, but how do you put those in the hands of artists? I think that's the unanswered question that isn't necessarily obvious right now. Great example is machine learning that controls imagery. There's tools that do a whole bunch of automatic, really narrow processes, but you're kind of limited to the sliders that you get, and there's a very limited range of what you can do. But machine learning is really a process of training the machine to kind of apply processes like a human would, and kind of opening it up in a way that still allows the artist to be kind of like a strong co-pilot to what the machine learning system is doing, I think is the aspiration that at least we have with our machine learning research. We have a project it's called Copycat. That's all about that, is like give before and afters and see, if the machine can figure out the relationship between them. And if you give the right types of befores and afters with the right creative intent, then what happens is the creative intent can become generalized. So that type of application is, I think, the kind of thing we're hoping starts to show up. But I think that it's still, it hasn't taken off yet. Is a kind of a full scale thing. I think that's the next big wave. I don't think it's going to take a COVID crisis, but I think it's going to really come in when we have when we want to ramp up productivity. These are force multipliers, and these types of force multipliers, I think, are really going to come in and work really well alongside other force multipliers like real time and cloud. Where you can just bring to bear resources at scale, or just get pixels back really, really fast, and apply really complex operations with machine learning, I think the shape of pipelines are going to be really transformed when all of those things converge into pipelines.
Well, so good. We're getting into the what changes forever and what sticks. Angus, Angus and in California and New York, we're both about to go back into heavier lockdowns, I think. So you're probably, you had a little bit of experience of coming back out and working together, and now you're facing going back in again. What are you planning for reemergence?
Well, I think there's still going to be, what's happened is there's a lot that's been learnt about production. And I think, production has been approached in a way now where it is achievable and you can scale it way back. I think those enormous sets that we used to go to with hundreds and hundreds of people, and when you turn up to a set now during COVID, the sets are smaller. There's a big component of people that are actually just zooming in. They're kind of looking from afar. And, that in itself has allowed this to happen. But I think, it's the US, it might be LA that kind of goes down into lockdown again, but there's still other parts of the world. And because we've built what we've done in the cloud. So we've actually got kind of all of our infrastructure, all of our workstations, literally all of our data is in the cloud. We can actually use people from around the world. So we can use people from Europe, or from South America, from the West Coast and East Coast, from Canada. And having that ability to kind of not just kind of have people from the immediate kind of metro area, but really to kind of reach across kind of countries and borders and get to talent that is outside of those areas is I think is really going to change our business. I think that's really, really exciting because it gives us the ability to tap into really exceptional talent if they don't necessarily live in your city. A lot of really good artists prefer, I'm not going to live in a city. I want to live out in kind of this beautiful remote part of North Carolina. And, they've got a great life. And it gives you access to amazing talent like that. So, even in a pandemic, I think we always find a way. I think we're very resourceful. There's always a way to do something. There's always a way to achieve something. And I think it's just an obstacle that we've presented to us, and we will find a way around it. People are very resourceful as a species.
And happy artists and engineers make better work.
Yeah, that's true. Keep them happy, huh?
Yeah.
Well, and in a way, Erik, you've always been remote. So as you say, you've always had to work with partners from around the world or bring them on airplanes. And when we were setting this up, we talked a little bit about traveling less and being able to create more upfront with, we'll say with photography, but also maybe accepting the word of somebody remotely. You go out and is that place going to do, and you trust the word of that person. So are you seeing travel for Weta going way down?
It certainly does seem like there's going to be a lot more that we can get done, potentially without having to send people around. Although, as I mentioned previously, you cannot, at some point, you can't completely replace that interaction. If a shoot is happening on the other side of the planet, you certainly want to make sure that you're there to ensure that what is being shot is going to be best serve the needs of the project. But certainly by any stretch, we certainly are going to, for example, we're having a conversation about a potential project where, because New Zealand's, early and hard lockdown was really effective and suddenly the country's kind of opened up again, there was the possibility, well, could the production send, say, just a production designer down to travel around the country because they were looking to shoot here anyway for the thing? Could they, could you go around and LiDAR scan and photograph different locations so that we could all then take that back in and all scout it virtually together in VR with the client in LA and us here and whoever else, wherever they are around the world. And that's one of those things where I hope that we get to a point where, libraries or catalogs of locations start to become digitized to some degree so that you could, in essence, something along the lines of like a Google Earth or something, could you all jump in there in VR and actually see a sort of more high resolution version of a location, so that you can kind of quickly, check off, no, that's not going to work. We don't like the look of this place. That place has bad access. This place has a really ugly gas station. If you turn around, that kind of stuff. Get through those initial kind of location scouts, eliminate the ones that are not going to work, so that you can focus on the handful of ones that might be really good for a project, and then focus your travel around spending some time looking at those specific places. So I think it's where can we sort of bring in this technology to sort of enhance the process that always happens anyway.
So James, so you're in California, absolutely on the other end of the world. How is it shaping up for you? How do you see 2021 being different?
Well, I think thanks to 2020, it will be different, obviously, but also, change brings opportunity, and you do have to rethink things and perhaps look at the way things used to be done and reassess as to whether they could be done better another way. And one thing that 2020, if there is any positive to be taken away, is that we've seen different ways of doing things out of necessity, which perhaps are better. Certainly with remote working and remote workers, some people are fantastic at it. And some people who didn't work so well in an office situation are actually a lot more comfortable in a work from home situation or a remote situation and produce better work. So, I've seen it on a practical level that, the results that we'll get are different from different people. There's also, I think, a learned quotient to this, where people need to retrain in some ways. And I don't mean necessarily as a sort of an official thing, but you need to learn how to work remotely. And again, some people love it and some people hate it. So, and then, there's obviously the necessity, and I agree with everyone that face-to-face contact is second to none under certain circumstances. But, you may notice I don't have an American accent. And as an Australian, similarly to New Zealanders and people from outside of where there is a concentration of production, a concentration of population, have had to work in an industry that to a degree was always remote, unless we were working on much smaller, local productions. So those skills kind of were forced onto you to survive in the industry. It's nothing fancy, and it's not sort of a secret sauce or anything like that. It's just a different way of communicating and evolving the way that you communicate, which I think is probably going to be the big takeaway from 2020. It's that our pipeline, our personnel pipeline at least, and the way that we communicate with each other and the way we express ourselves and the way we deal with different creative problems is going to be reshaped, simply because we will have a more dispersed workforce and we'll be looking at sort of doing these things in slightly different ways.
Matt, did I see you raise your hand or?
No, I was gesturing just in agreement with James. Not being one of the people directly affected by this really resonates with just the conversations I've had with lots of folks. The opportunity to work with people remotely, to pick the type of alignment that you have with those folks and have a much broader spectrum of folks with which you can align I think that's the big opportunity. But it's a two-way street as well. Folks who are moving to this new way of working have to figure out how to do it and tap into maybe superpowers that weren't as put to use as often when they were maybe working in that more kind of linear top-down approach. And what's interesting is previously at Foundry, I led a cloud product that was all about bringing software to freelancers and small studios through the cloud. And almost everyone interested in that was, there are folks who were really excited about what cloud and what the possibilities meant to them in terms of their lifestyle. and their the way they align that with their professional way of working. And they kind of started with their sort of lifestyle and who they were as a creative, and work backwards from that. And they found that the application of technology like, you know, cloud and remote work and that type of thing was the way to satisfy that that need. And I think now in the pandemic in 2021, those people are going to thrive, and they're going to have the opportunity that they have been trying to create for themselves is going to be potentially much bigger, and there will probably be more of them. And I think that's a really amazing thing. I think that change in terms of how people see the value of the work they bring and how they create that value in terms of their own personal sense of fulfillment is going to be really cool to see. I think that's one of the big opportunities that's coming out of this year.
Yeah, and in essence, that's sort of a change in culture. You know, this is sort of from left field, but I was thinking, as y'all were talking, I was thinking that a lot of you have a lot of experience in short form and commercials or episodics and that sort of thing. Is that an advantage for this big time of change where you're not locked into a commitment you've made for years on a long piece?
I think it is. I think, you know, working in commercials, people tend to be kind of quite resourceful, quite pragmatic. I think you kind of have to think on your feet. You have to pivot very quickly. I think it's a good training ground. I think it's also, just from my experience, it's great to be working on lots of smaller projects rather than one big one, but that's personal choice. Some people prefer big, long projects that are great. It's good if you're working on a great project, kind of, you know, if you're working on something that Weta's doing, like Lord of the Rings or kind of one of the new avatars, it's fantastic. But what if you work on something that's not so good? You just spend the last year of your life on it. So I don't know. The short form is, I really like that. It's conducive to us, the way we think, the way we kind of innovate, the way we kind of just like to pivot. So it's kind of, it suits our business.
So James, it's sort of an opportunity to rethink what you're doing anew every time, or are systems in place?
It's a little bit of both, I think. You know, systems are in place, and certainly, you know, the easy way to think about things is just to fall back on what worked before. But in visual effects particularly, because you do have to keep your eye on how things are changing, the technology is changing, and production, I guess, as well, you can't sort of rest on your laurels for too long. So, you know, while previously we may have been able to sort of not incorporate things quite as quickly, I think now there's more of an appetite to actually embrace newer techniques or newer things to be part of the workflow and make you more efficient. And that perhaps is a little bit of an icebreaker that 2020 provided.
Yeah, I suppose there has to be a good side. So Ben, can you check? I cannot take my hand off the trackpad or it makes noise. So could you check and see if there are questions? Maybe not.
There are indeed.
Okay.
So one question is, as remote workflows are being developed, deployed, and assessed, what challenges did that present regarding community and industry outreach, and how were those challenges approached?
Okay. Anybody want to leap into that, or should I just assign you? Erik, you've been quiet.
I'll go. I mean, so like when the lockdown happened, I think we had, you know, management at Weta had sort of identified that this was likely going to be the case as early as January. And so when it did finally, you know, arrive in New Zealand, I think it did still, even with all that planning, still did kind of take us by surprise in terms of how quickly the lockdown occurred, having to get everybody out of the building in the course of, I think it was like 3 days. Up and working was quite the technological marvel, and you sort of you find that certainly I found that when we were on a project and once everybody got over that initial couple of days of kind of getting their bearings about how this whole process was going to go, everything just kind of kept ticking over as usual, because at that point you were already in a flow, you had your daily schedule, you were having your reviews, your client sessions and everything else, which were already remote anyway. But then, I found that as soon as that project was over, and in that time between the next show starting up again, that's when loneliness struck. And so you had to start thinking about how, how can you keep up with the notion of like the random hallway encounters, the conversations you might have with somebody who you're just passing, the water cooler conversations in the kitchen or something like that, or the stuff you might talk about over lunch with somebody. And that's one of, again, kind of gets back to that idea of the face-to-face thing. Like, how do you replace that? I'm not sure you entirely can, but it does sort of, we did see a number of sort of channels pop up on, say, we use Microsoft Teams for a lot of our team collaboration. You start getting into special channels for the special interests that people would have to try and at least give people an outlet to talk about things that aren't work at times. But to some degree, I mean, the social aspect of doing what we do is a huge part of it. And it is a really interesting question, because as I think you're saying earlier, Kathleen, like not everybody is comfortable on camera. Like the idea of everybody jumping into like a 30-person Zoom chat, instead of a beer o'clock or something like that, it's just not the same, And so that's one of the, I guess, questions about the remote thing. My wife just finished doing a PhD in managing remote teams. And so it's something I've been hearing a lot about over the last couple of years, of what does it mean to manage a group that's sort of spread very, far apart from each other? And how do you keep people feeling like they're a part of a team and not just off working by themselves? And it's easy when everybody's kind of constantly collaborating on a schedule. That becomes much harder when people are actually more sort of off doing their own thing. I'm curious how you guys are finding it.
James, you were talking about the experience when lockdown happened and everything just quit. Everything quit. And then you sort of had to build up. What was that experience like?
Yeah, there was sort of a sudden deflation in sort of the incoming work, I guess. We had projects which were running through and much as Erik, we were sort of in a groove. So we were able to sort of keep going. But the subsequent projects kind of tended to fall into a lull. The difficulty, I think, in that case was more that the clients and probably everybody thought that this thing was going to be over in a month. So may as well just wait and see what happens. Then it became clear that this wasn't going to finish. We had some clients that we were working on projects with that were heavily NDA'd, and there was great resistance to them allowing the material to be remotely deployed, even though we were using security protocols and all the rest of it. There was that threshold, I guess, was broken, where, they realized that things couldn't actually, stay locked down and then get any work done or product out. So that suddenly changed, and we were able to actually work remotely on that heavily NDA material, and it's been very successful in doing that. So it was an interesting sort of transitionary period, because once that threshold was sort of reached and everyone realized, well, nothing's going to happen if we don't allow this to be remote, then suddenly there was an upswing in the amount of work, and the client attitude changed greatly towards what kind of work they were happy to let out, and how much of it. And so really we've been incredibly busy over the last, I guess, 6 months. How long have we been in lockdown? What day is it? I can't remember. But it definitely has become a very different sort of landscape recently.
I think I've heard that from all of you too, that now it's ramping up and you all have plenty of work to do. That's true for you, Angus, right? That you've got your...
Absolutely. No, we've got great board flow, and we've got kind of great projects on the horizon. I think there's definitely kind of people looking at the next surge in the US, trying to think, what's happening there. But for the most part, we're great. We've got a great kind of diverse diet of work as well. Everything from full CGI to real time to compositing to, so that's great. I think diversity is key. You don't want to just kind of have just one style of work, because if you have one style of work, if that suddenly disappears, then you're going to be in trouble. So having a diverse diet, I think, is so important. But yeah, no, we're busy.
I found a question here in the chat, and Chris Chinook asked, how do you transition to 8K? It's sort of an awkward time, or can that be done? I guess I'll look at you, Erik.
I guess you start looking at cloud at that point. I guess it's always historically been the thing that, like, every year machines were getting faster, storage was getting cheaper. And so you just keep throwing more and more and more at the project, creating much more elaborate imagery, much more demanding computing processes and that kind of thing. And 8K is the same idea along those lines.
Just more of it.
Just got an exponential amount more pixels to push through. So it does certainly point to the notion of needing to rely probably more on cloud, because now who can scale their render walls to the degree that is needed for that kind of work.
That's exactly what I was thinking. So yeah, I mean, with LED screens, don't you need much better LED screens because you can see the pixels more?
I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, to some degree, depending on, I guess, on the size of your wall, the resolution of your sensor and everything else. I mean, if you're doing in-camera LED wall work, at some point, you probably can never actually throw focus to the screen itself. So long as allowing your content to be slightly, out of focus, I think you can get away with a lot. But that is one of those creative, sort of requirements that everybody has to be on board with if you're going to go that route.
I just found another question that's a good one. How has hiring changed for you all during the pandemic? And James, why don't you take the first stab at that?
Don't ask me that.
Oh,
I mean, it hasn't really changed. I mean, a lot of the times you're hiring people remotely anyway. You're interviewing them because they're not physically in the same city. So, to a certain extent, I think there's not a sort of vast difference. In terms of skills, again, it's not vastly different, but you are looking, I guess, for that extra element, which is someone who can work well remotely. And what that is, comes down to the things that you would expect in a physical interview, which is how do they communicate? Obviously base skills being a very important part of that as well. And if it's a creative role, creative skills, but you want to sort of know that this person is going to be able to work independently to a certain extent, understand a brief, which may not be able to be reinforced simply by, the fact that you're actually remote and don't have that sort of instantaneous contact. But then effectively, I don't think a lot has changed in terms of, the kind of person you're looking for and how you might interview them or assess them, because that's kind of how you used to do it before.
But I think, I don't think I'll make anybody else say this out loud, but frankly, it is probably a really hard time to come in new to the industry because given all these challenges, people are having to go with what they know. Is that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that is a big problem, and I think it's something Angus touched on as well, which is how do you train people remotely, and that is a very difficult thing to do because it's not something that you have that ability to get that ambient understanding from things. If you're in a studio situation and you're sitting next to somebody and you hear them talking about something, but they're not necessarily addressing you, you will probably learn something from that. You can look over someone's shoulder and see how they're attacking a problem and say, hey, what are you doing there? I don't recognize what you're doing, and they'll explain it to you. And that we don't necessarily have the ability to, freely do in this situation. Certainly you can VPN into someone's machine and sort of see what they're doing and whatnot, but that generally falls down to sort of supervisors trying to work on a problem with someone or lead artists trying to help out or whatever it might be. It's not a casual interaction that you get when you're physically in the same space. And I don't know what the answer is to that, but I know that it's definitely a problem.
Well, the good thing is this is going to end. And
Yeah.
and so we sort of see work happening, like some days remote, everybody comes in, other times there's for training or whatever. Perhaps.
Yeah, at Foundry, our research team has grown probably just doubled in size at least this year. So for me, being part of this group, I haven't met most of the people that I work with today, which is just really bonkers to me. And yet I'm familiar with them. But when it comes to training and onboarding them, one of the things that we found that was an opportunity with the pandemic and all being on Zoom was it sort of forced us to carve out training as like a deliberate act. So for example, we've been upskilling people on things like, container technology or cloud technology. We just did a seminar led by one of our AI researchers this morning, and she has a curriculum to bootstrap people on machine learning and the different approaches and how to apply those to to people who might be working on like our products in Nuke or Katana. And when we kind of carve out the time, and we've been forming like guilds and really trying to carve out that time on Zoom, so it's not just time for us to meet operationally, but there's time for us to kind of bring these remote people together to focus on like a specific topic. I think that's where you can kind of turn that disadvantage almost into into an advantage, because if it wasn't for that, we may not have been as on the ball about how do we upskill everybody around machine learning. Be like, no, it's fine. There's a group sitting over there, those desks who are doing it. But now that it's so easy to bring a lot of people together and share the knowledge, and we're starting to to figure out that we can create those opportunities ourselves artificially through the type of relationship we all have together over a wire every day. So I think that's actually exciting, and is actually a positive thing, because I think it's actually resulted in more opportunities for people to learn things that they wouldn't have otherwise been exposed to than if we had just kind of been business as usual.
Well, and heck, you can record Zoom meetings and that sort of thing too. So so let's have another look at that. We're almost up to time. Ben, have you got a worthy question for one last question?
I've been putting them all in the chat.
Oh, is that why they're turning up there? Thanks, Ben. So let's see. Oh, well.
There's a lot of really good questions.
Yeah, John, give me one, because I'm having trouble seeing too. Everything's going
Well,
on.
Jose Marnes, how is reliance on remote artists, resources through internet connections, license, so forth, affected planning and hiring without a unified pipeline that can be achieved in a controlled studio environment? And we've kind of talked around that a little bit, but I don't think that specific question has been answered.
I mean, I guess speaking for Weta, I mean, we are still using a unified pipeline. I think anybody that is working remotely for us is basically just driving a desktop machine that's here someplace in New Zealand. So we all are working. Nobody's working on using local licenses or that kind of thing for that sort of work if they're an artist. I think to the point of some of the technology and research people, developers on our rendering teams, for example, we do have people sort of scattered around the globe, wherever doing whatever they happen to be doing, and that's probably much closer to a traditional sort of, closer to the experience of tech teams, whether it's web dev or other kind of areas of technology around the globe. Like lots of teams are working remotely, but it does become more difficult if you're doing actual if you're an artist doing visual effects work, because now you're actually having to push, whether it's 4K or God forbid 8K imagery, and having to sort of, look at that through a remote desktop kind of scenario. So at least as far as that goes, all the content is staying here, and you're just sort of getting a remote window into that content.
And that's
Yeah,
the same for us as well. You know, we're working on with network boxes that just go back into our network. We're all working off the same network storage and pipeline and render farm and all that sort of stuff. So effectively, it just gives us a window into the office as opposed to being something that's, you know, independent of that and having to be uploaded to us.
We've heard this from other folks as well. It's I say we're in a transitional period from the way we do work. One of the people, Rich Miller, asked a question which I think is really interesting with regard to working remotely, working at home and so forth. He asks, might this not be the time for a more introverted worker to really shine, where they could just
Absolutely, yeah,
show their
absolutely. I
work?
think I think it was James that touched on it earlier on, and just, you know, some people actually work better at home, and some people are not comfortable being kind of around lots of other people and having to be social, but they could be extraordinary artists, you know, magnificent talents. So absolutely, it could be definitely a time.
One of the things we learned in our research is that there's actually been an increase in productivity, and the productivity comes from two places. It's A, not wasting your life sitting in a car or a train or something to getting from point A to point B and then reversing that and going home. So you get all that time back, but also you don't have to attend so damn many boring meetings where you're really just burning time. And the net result of that is we're getting more work done. And you know, the original fear of having people work at home, going back some years now, was that they wouldn't work at home if they were there, that they'd be lazy, they'd, you know, watch TV or do whatever, you know, they shouldn't be doing. Turns out just the opposite, that people work harder at home to make sure that they don't get criticized for being lazy.
That's probably true.
This remote working is really, you know, having a lot of payoff for us.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that is a danger of the remote situation is artists, you know, being willing to work longer than they normally would have if they're in the office, or, oh, I've just finished dinner, I'll just make that one tweak on the shop before I go to bed, and, you know, suddenly it's 2 o'clock in the morning or something. You know, and then whether feeling too guilty to bill for those hours, or they weren't approved hours, and I guess I've just worked for free. I mean, that's a very real danger of remote work.
Yeah, I agree. And there are innumerable articles, you know, scattered all over the web in various places that are advising us now working at home alone, cut out time for your family. You know, don't, just because you're home doesn't mean you can ignore them. And you know, it's one of those things that's unfortunate. It's easy to give advice, it's hard to take it.
So, and maybe we have to take it because we're coming up to the end of time here. So,
Okay. So I just have one thing I wanted to share with you guys, if I can. And that is that we've published a white paper on Omniverse. I don't know if everybody's familiar with Omniverse or not. And hopefully this is going to come up here. Maybe not.
there it is.
There it is. Anyway, Omniverse is one of the techniques that's being developed. NVIDIA is the developer of it. And it's one of many verses out there that are being created. Theirs happens to be one of the first ones, I guess, or one of the more, let's say, publicized ones. In any case, we wrote a white paper about this, and anybody who wants it, you can see my email address is there. I'm easy to contact. I answer all the emails I get, believe it or not, and I try to do it within 24 hours. So if you have any questions about this seminar, this webinar, what I'd like to do, I don't know if we're going to be able to or not, is I'd like to take all these questions we got and answer them. If we have email tagged to them in some way that we could do that, that would be great, because I think the questions are really great. Or maybe what we could do is answer all the questions in another paper and publish that on the VFX website somewhere. Anyway, just thinking out loud here.
Well, I think Ben could help us with that. Uh-oh. So,
Is that the buzzer? We out of time?
yeah, I think so.
No, that's it.
My finger's tired. But anyway, so
Reach the destination.
yeah. So thanks so much for everybody for coming. And I'm so sorry about the technical difficulties. That was a total surprise. And thanks to VES for hosting this, and to the Foundry for making it happen.
Yeah, Foundry really was instrumental in getting us all together.
Yeah, thanks everyone. It's just great to have the opportunity to talk about this stuff in a forum like this with such great speakers and forward thinkers. So yeah, it's been really awesome.
Let's do it again.
Let's do it again.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thanks for the fun conversation,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.